And it's into that context that Chalmers is actually born. His parents were faithful members of their parish, were very interested in the poor who are in the parish. And Chalmers grows up in a Christian home where he's taught the Bible, he's taught the Shorter Catechism. So he has the sort of fundamentals of the faith from a very, very early age. He's educated at the local school. He's not a great student. He's no more for his physical strength than he is for any great academic attainment. When he leaves the local school, he goes to St. Andrew's University in 1791 when he's only 11 years old, which, is kind of mind-boggling. And even by the standards of his day, where children went to university a lot earlier than they do now, this was early enrollment by anyone's definition. He wasn't a spectacular student, and he comments later in life that he regrets that he hadn't worked harder. But nonetheless, he did well enough. And interestingly enough, he does particularly well in mathematics. In 1795, he begins divinity studies. And this is sort of at the insistence of his father. And it's not because he felt a particular call to gospel ministry, but because he believed that being a minister would provide him with comfortable employment and the social status that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, how things have changed.
I was going to say, oh yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you about this, Sandy. It's interesting to consider some of his thoughts at the time, and he recognized that maybe he wasn't the greatest student early on, but it seems at divinity school and then maybe just after, when he started to teach in some occasions, I was curious what his own thoughts of himself were, because he seemed as a young man to have, maybe in a sense, you described him as having a very high view of his own abilities and a desire to cultivate that and let other people know.
I think arrogant would be the operative word here.
Yeah.
He felt he thought he was really pretty important. And he when he becomes a minister, so he's ordained in 1803. And is working in a rural parish in Fife. But he largely neglects his pastoral duties to a significant extent and focuses his energies on trying to get a job at the University of St. Andrews. And I mean, just to give you a sense of his interests, he publishes his first book in 1807, which is called An Inquiry into the Extent and Stability of National Resources. So he's writing a book on political economy, essentially, in 1807. Now, the book was seriously panned by the critics, which was a huge disappointment to him. He really took major hits because the book was not well received. And actually, in the providence of God, I think that may have been something that so shook him that he began to really sort of question himself a little bit. That maybe he wasn't quite as important or quite as good as he thought he was. But then between 1809 and 1810, there are a number of things that happen to him. He becomes very ill with consumption. A number of his families die from consumption, siblings that he was very close to. And then as he's recovering from his illness, he begins to read William Wilberforce. And it's in reading William Wilberforce that God uses that, humanly speaking, to bring about his conversion to true Christianity. So I mean, he begins his parish ministry not a Christian, and it's only after he has been in parish ministry for a number of years that he actually comes to saving faith, which is really interesting.
This is even a worse idea than missionary dating.
Yes.
To try to get people into the ministry so that they be converted, but the Lord works in mysterious ways. We're thankful for that.
Yeah.
But my word,
yeah. So and one of the things there are a number of volumes of Chalmers' sermons that you can read. The early sermons are largely just moralistic, live a decent life, work hard, be nice to your neighbor kind of messages. But immediately after his conversion, there's a massive change in his preaching, not surprisingly.
Yeah.
And he begins to really come to understand the meaning of true faith.
Wow. How did his parish ministry change at the time? Did he at that moment have a shift in perspective where he moved from career to vocation and pour himself into parish ministry, or did that develop and flourish later on in life?
It had an instant, and I would say even profound effect upon his parish work. After he returns from his illness to his duties, his whole view really changed. So instead of viewing his pastoral ministry as a means to gaining recognition and preferment, he now sees that he was called to preach the gospel and serve his parishioners. So I've already mentioned the radically different change in tone to his preaching, but he also begins to start working on things like Bible societies, missionary societies, and he begins this Paris visitation and working much more directly with the people in his parish.
Yeah, I can't imagine there wouldn't be a radical change once his heart is
of course
renewed, right? That then means he's doing visitation. His preaching is biblical. Those two things, of course, go together. If you want to preach effectively, you kind of need to know where your people are at.
The other significant event in this period of his life is his marriage. He marries a woman by the name of Grace Pratt, who was daughter of an army captain. She actually came from one of the wealthier families in the parish and brought some money to the marriage. They had a very happy marriage. Were blessed with 6 daughters, and Anne Chalmers, Grace Chalmers, his wife. She essentially becomes his secretary, handling his correspondence, and then ultimately, as his ministry continues to develop, she becomes the major person who manages his publishing endeavors, his interactions with his publisher. And so she had a really good head for business, which he probably did not. And so which was a huge blessing for him.